we celebrate the 20th century as an era of unprecedented technological triumph. But what if the foundation of our modern world was actually built on pure malice? Behind the closed doors of the Third Reich, scientists were not just trying to win a war. They were attempting to rewrite the laws of physics to achieve absolute planetary domination. From the deepest underground slave camps to the freezing vacuum of space, Nazi Germany was developing apocalyptic machines that violently blurred the line between science fiction and sheer madness. These are the most terrifying weapons ever conceived and our darkest inherited legacy: the V2 ballistic missile and the Mittelbau-Dora atrocities. Imagine walking down a bustling street in London in late 1944. There is no air raid siren. There is no distant drone of bomber engines. There is only instantaneous devastation. This was the terrifying reality of the V2 ballistic missile, a weapon that fundamentally broke the rules of acoustic physics and warfare. The V2 earned its grim reputation as the silent death because of its sheer, unimaginable speed. Reaching a maximum cruise velocity of 5,760 kilometers per hour, or Mach 4.7, the missile fell from the stratosphere and slammed into its targets at Mach 235. Because it traveled vastly faster than the speed of sound, it outpaced its own acoustic signature. The physical sequence of a strike occurred in a completely reverse acoustic order. First came the kinetic impact and the violent detonation of the warhead tearing through buildings and streets. Only after the dust began to rise would survivors hear a sharp double-bang shockwave, the sonic boom of the falling missile finally breaking the sound barrier at ground level. And finally, a descending, rushing roar of atmospheric displacement caught up with the wreckage, trailing eerily behind the impact site. This lack of any warning caused immense psychological terror among civilian populations, leaving them completely defenseless against an attack they could never hear coming. Yet, to understand the sheer magnitude of this weapon, we must look at the technological leap it represented. On June 20th, 1944, at the Peenemünde Army Research Center, a vertical test launch of rocket MW18014 achieved an astonishing apogee of 176 kilometers. That is 109 miles above the Earth. In doing so, this German missile became the first human-made artifact in history to cross the 100-kilometer boundary, the border of space we now define as the Kármán line. It was the first suborbital spaceflight, a monumental watershed moment in human engineering. But this leap into the cosmos was driven by an astonishing degree of financial and strategic hubris. Consider the absurd economics of this program. Each individual V2 cost the German war machine an immense 100,000 Reichsmarks. To put that into perspective, the resources and funds required to build just one of these rockets could have paid for 6 conventional fighter aircraft. And for all that astronomical expense, the V2 delivered a mere 1-ton warhead. This was an incredibly light and highly inaccurate payload compared to the devastating destruction unleashed by conventional Allied bomber fleets. The true horror of the V2 program, however, lies in a grim statistical distinction. It remains the only weapon system in military history to inflict far greater mortality during its manufacturing phase than through its actual combat deployment. Between September 1944 and March 1945, the Wehrmacht launched over 3,000 rockets primarily against Antwerp and London. These combat strikes resulted in approximately 9,000 civilian and military fatalities. Entire communities were shattered in an instant, such as the devastating strike on the Woolworths department store in New Cross on November 25, 1944, which left 168 people dead, or the Smithfield Market attack the following March that killed 110, yet this appalling death toll is entirely dwarfed by the blood spilled to build the weapons. An estimated 12,000 to 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died assembling these rockets in pitch-black subterranean factories. Following the Allied bombing of Peenemünde, production was relocated deep inside a converted gypsum mine beneath the Kohnstein mountain. Here, the Mittelwerk underground factory was established, drawing its slave labor force from the infamous Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. Over 60,000 prisoners were dragged into this abyss. They were initially housed directly inside the damp, unventilated tunnels, crammed into 4-level wooden bunk beds stacked in lateral sleeping chambers known as Schlafstollen. Thousands upon thousands succumbed to starvation, rampant disease, and catastrophic injuries from falling rock, while executions for suspected sabotage were a daily reality. The architects of this nightmare did not face the justice many would expect. As the Third Reich collapsed, the United States launched Operation Paperclip, a highly classified initiative to recruit over 1,600 German scientists and exploit their technical mastery. At the center of this was the technical director of the W2 program, Werner von Braun. This was a man who held the rank of major in the SS and had personally visited the Buchenwald concentration camp to handpick skilled prisoners for his subterranean workshops. To bypass strict immigration restrictions and denazification laws, American intelligence heavily sanitized his records, effectively washing away his deep complicity in these atrocities. Von Braun and his team were brought to the United States, where they laid the fundamental groundwork for the Saturn V rocket. The very same engineering minds that built a weapon of pure terror, forged in the darkest misery of underground slave camps, ultimately built the machine that powered the Apollo missions and carried humanity to the moon, the controversial Sonnengewehr orbital megastructure. Imagine an empire capable of boiling an ocean from over 5,000 miles away. Picture a weapon suspended in the heavens, completely immune to any anti-aircraft fire, raining down concentrated solar fire to incinerate entire cities in mere seconds. This was not a villainous plot from a science fiction pulp magazine. This was the Sonnengewehr, or the Sun Gun, a terrifying orbital megastructure actively conceptualized during the final, desperate years of the Second World War. By 1944, as Allied forces closed in on all fronts, a group of German scientists stationed at the Army Artillery Proving Grounds in Hillersleben stopped trying to win a conventional ground war. Instead, they began plotting an absolutely chilling, comic book-level scheme for total planetary domination from high Earth orbit. The underlying science was not born of malice. The blueprint was actually a corruption of a deeply peaceful concept. Back in 1923, the pioneering space theorist Hermann Oberth proposed an ambitious idea for a manned space station equipped with a massive, concave mirror. Oberth envisioned using this structure to reflect concentrated sunlight down to Earth, to generate clean electricity and artificially warm, frozen agricultural zones to feed humanity. But in the darkened halls of Hillersleben, military researchers mutated Oberth's utopian dream into an instrument of ultimate destruction. They meticulously calculated the physics for a manned space station positioned at a staggering orbital altitude of 8,200 kilometers. From this supreme vantage point, target nations lacking advanced space-capable rocketry would be entirely powerless to defend themselves or counter the searing attacks from above. The mechanical ambition of the Sun Gun is genuinely staggering to comprehend. The weapon required a precise parabolic reflector with a surface area of 9 square kilometers. To solve the immense structural challenge of launching and assembling a mirror of this colossal scale, the designers turned to an unexpected material, metallic sodium. This choice highlights the extreme ingenuity of the project. On Earth, metallic sodium is incredibly hazardous, oxidizing rapidly and violently reacting with moisture. Yet, the Hillersleben team understood that in the airless, moisture-free vacuum of space, sodium remains highly stable. crucially, it possesses a remarkably low density of just 0.97 grams per cubic centimeter. This made the material light enough to be propelled into orbit, where astronauts could roll or cast it into ultra-thin, brilliantly reflective sheets stretched across a vast, lightweight framework. By adjusting the curvature of this gigantic sodium mirror, the crew could converge the harsh rays of the sun into a tight, concentrated focal point directly on the surface of the Earth, generating temperatures hot enough to instantly evaporate reservoirs and turn steel and concrete to ash. To transport these massive structural components into the cosmos, the scientists relied on the theoretical heavy-lift rocketry designs of Wernher von Braun, specifically the multi-stage A-11 and A-12 rockets. Deploying the mirror was only half the battle. Maintaining a permanent military garrison 200 kilometers above the planet required solving monumental life support problems. The resulting solutions sound like something lifted directly from a Jules Verne novel. To navigate the weightless environment, the orbital crew would be equipped with specialized magnetic boots, allowing them to walk normally along the heavy steel interior bulkheads. Electrical power for the station's massive machinery would be generated by steam-driven dynamos, continuously fueled by the intense, concentrated heat of unfiltered solar radiation. Most bizarre of all was the oxygen replenishment system. To keep the crew alive, the designers planned to build massive, pressurized greenhouses right inside the station. These zero-gravity gardens would be heavily cultivated with specialized, fast-growing pumpkin plants, chosen specifically for their aggressive ability to absorb carbon dioxide and pump fresh oxygen back into the closed-loop atmospheric system. The scope of this orbital nightmare remained a closely guarded secret until the dying days of the Third Reich. In May 1945, a specialized team of American intelligence officers and scientific investigators, led by Lieutenant Colonel John A. Keck, overran the Hillersleben Proving Grounds. Buried among the captured documents, Keck and his men discovered the complete, highly detailed blueprints for the Sonnengewehr. They did not dismiss the plans as the ramblings of defeated men. American military engineers analyzed the complex thermodynamic calculations and took the orbital megastructure very seriously. During subsequent interrogations, the captured German physicists delivered a chilling assessment. They confidently stated that, with sufficient funding and undisturbed industrial capacity, the sun gun could be fully operational within 50 to 100 years. The sheer audacity of this doomsday device shocked the world when the discovery was finally publicized on June 29, 1945, dominating the front pages of the New York Times, and later featuring heavily in Life magazine. These public exposures introduced the terrifying concept of orbital superweapons to a stunned global public, forever altering the trajectory of post-war aerospace planning. The issues of Horten Ho, 229 Stealth Flying Wing. In 1943, the head of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, issued a sweeping, impossible mandate to the German aviation industry. He demanded a light bomber capable of carrying a 1,000-kilogram bomb load over a distance of 1,000 kilometers at a blistering speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour. Think about the mathematical reality of that demand for a second. Early turbojet engines were notoriously fuel-hungry, guzzling aviation fuel at an astonishing rate. To achieve a 1,000-kilometer range, a conventional airframe would require a massive internal fuel capacity. But adding those massive fuel tanks would inevitably increase the weight and drag of the aircraft, completely destroying any chance of reaching that 1,000-kilometer-per-hour speed requirement. You might assume the high command had lost their grasp on aerodynamic physics. A standard fuselage and tail setup simply could not meet these specifications. To solve this impossible equation, two visionary brothers, Reimar and Walter Horten, stepped forward with a radical solution. They designed the Horten H. Malice, officially designated the Ho-229 by the Reich Air Ministry. The Horten brothers realized that the only way to maximize aerodynamic efficiency and eliminate parasitic drag was to completely remove the fuselage, the tailplane, and the vertical stabilizers. They created the first jet-propelled pure flying wing. The powered prototype featured twin junkers, Jumo 04B turbojets, embedded directly within the thickened center section of the wing structure. The engineering tolerances were remarkable. The wing chord-to-thickness ratio ranged from 15% at the root to 8% at the wingtips, designed to handle a positive 7.0 limit load, boasting an ultimate load rating of 12.6 G. It was an incredibly advanced approach to aerodynamics, built to cruise at 900 km per hour with a maximum range of 1,900 km. Yet, when you look past the futuristic sweeping silhouette of the Ho-229, you find a physical construction shaped entirely by severe late-war desperation. The German war machine was bleeding out, suffering from critical shortages of essential aviation metals like duralumin and aluminum. Instead of sleek aerospace-grade alloys, the outer wings of this cutting-edge aircraft were skinned with thin plywood panels. These wooden panels were held together using a crude mixture of urea resin and sawdust glue. The center pod was cobbled together from welded steel tubing, and the wing spars were built entirely out of wood. To save absolutely every available resource, the heavy front nose wheel was not even a custom part. It was simply salvaged from the tail landing gear of a wrecked Heinkel, a 177 Greif heavy bomber. The Ho-229 was a paradox of 21st century aerodynamic theory, built with 19th century materials. This brings us to one of the most pervasive, heavily romanticized myths of the Second World War. For decades, the Ho-229 has been celebrated as the first intentional stealth fighter. This legend stems directly from a claim made by Reimar Horten himself in 1983. He stated that he had planned to mix charcoal dust into the urea resin wood glue of the production versions to absorb electromagnetic waves and evade the British chain-home early warning radar system. We need to completely dismantle this fiction. Modern chemical and structural analyses have definitively disproved Reimar Horten's claims. In 2008, a team of aerospace engineers from Northrop Grumman built a full-scale wooden replica of the V3 prototype and subjected it to rigorous testing against radar frequencies in the 20 to 50 MHz range. The chemical analysis found absolutely zero trace of charcoal or carbon black anywhere in the original preserved materials. Furthermore, the radar tests concluded that while the smooth, blended shape and lack of vertical surfaces did reduce its radar cross-section by roughly 60% compared to a Messerschmitt Bf 109, it offered no practical stealth advantage. Under ideal combat conditions, the chain-home radar network would still have detected the Ho-229 at about 80% of the range needed to spot a standard Bf 109. The aircraft was aerodynamically brilliant, but it was absolutely not an intentional stealth bomber. The program was plagued by the same chaotic safety issues and rapid collapses that defined late-war German engineering. The flight trials were incredibly dangerous. While the first prototype flew as an unpowered glider, the jet-powered V2 prototype suffered a catastrophic engine failure during a single-engine landing approach on only its second hour of flight. The resulting crash killed the skilled test pilot Erwin Ziller. Before the Horten brothers could fix the flaws and mass-produce their flying wing, time simply ran out. In April 1945, advancing American forces captured the Gothaer Wagenfabrik assembly facility in Friedrichroda. They secured the nearly completed V3 prototype right on the factory floor and immediately shipped it to the United States for extensive study by American military aeronautical engineers. This captured technological marvel directly influenced modern jet aviation design. The 800mm is a railway siege gun and its controversies. Imagine a machine so unimaginably massive that it becomes a tactical liability to the very army that built it. This is the story of the largest caliber rifled weapon ever used in human combat. Under the direction of Chief Engineer Erich Müller, the German industrial titan Krupp forged an absolute behemoth. Weighing a truly staggering 1,350 tons of pure Krupp steel and featuring a massive barrel stretching exactly 32.5 meters long, the Schwerer Gustav was an absolute engineering leviathan without equal. The German High Command poured 7 million Reichsmarks into this single weapon system. They commissioned it for one explicit, singular purpose, which was the total obliteration of the heavily fortified French Maginot Line. Yet, by the time the gun was finally completed, the German blitzkrieg had already simply driven around those French defenses, leaving the most powerful artillery piece on Earth without a target. To comprehend the sheer destructive capability of the Schwerer Gustav, you have to look at the monstrous projectiles it fired. The weapon hurled a massive 7,100-kilogram armor-piercing shell. Think about the gravity of that mass for a second. That is a 7.1-ton piece of high-grade chrome-nickel steel, fitted with an aluminum alloy ballistic nose cone, hurtling through the atmosphere at a muzzle velocity of 720 meters per second. During its initial acceptance trials at the Hillersleben and Rügenwald proving grounds, this sheer kinetic force demonstrated apocalyptic potential. Fired from a maximum effective range of 38 kilometers, this 7.1-ton projectile could violently punch through 7 meters of solid, reinforced concrete or a full meter of solid steel armor plate. It was not just artillery. It was a localized earthquake delivered on demand. This cataclysmic power found its singular moment of terrifying glory during the weapon's sole combat deployment. In June 1942, during the brutal siege of Sevastopol, part of Operation Barbarossa, the Gustav achieved what is widely considered one of the most destructive artillery strikes in all of military history. On June 6th, the massive gun targeted White Cliff, which was also known as Ammunition Mountain. This was a massive Soviet ammunition magazine deeply buried beneath Severnaya Bay. The facility was considered completely impregnable. It sat 30 meters below the seabed and was protected by at least 10 meters of reinforced concrete. The Schwerer Gustav fired 9 concrete piercing shells at the target. These massive projectiles plunged right through the sea, burrowed deep into the seabed, violently shattered the protective concrete, and detonated the entire subterranean Soviet arsenal in one massive, sympathetic explosion. The resulting shockwave completely destroyed the harbor installations above, utterly ruined the magazine, and even sank a cargo vessel anchored out in the bay. Despite this astonishing display of raw destructive power, the weapon was an absolute logistical nightmare. The staggering math required simply to move and deploy this gun proves it was the ultimate monument to military obsolescence. The Schwerer Gustav was completely dependent on rigid railway systems to move. To transport it, engineers had to completely disassemble the weapon and move it across twin sets of custom railway tracks, specifically engineered just to support its monumental weight. Preparing a firing site required a small army. Roughly 2,500 additional workers had to spend weeks painstakingly laying a specialized double-track rail spur, excavating deep embankments, and leveling the firing site. Once the site was ready, a dedicated force of 250 highly trained men had to work continuously for 54 hours just to assemble the weapon. To protect this massive investment from Allied air attacks, 2 entire air defense flak battalions had to be assigned to the unit just to babysit it. This colossal undertaking was a pathetic tactical failure. The rate of fire was agonizingly slow, averaging just one single round every 30 to 45 minutes. In an era defined by rapid battlefield mobility and rapidly advancing air power, the heavy railway gun was a static, vulnerable dinosaur. Even worse, the internal barrel suffered from rapid wear. After firing a mere 48 operational rounds at Sevastopol, the rifling was so heavily degraded that the entire gun had to be dismantled and sent back to the Krupp factory in Essen for complete relining. The immense resources, the thousands of labor hours, and the mountain of high-grade steel required to construct and operate the Gustav could have been utilized to produce hundreds of versatile, highly effective panzer tanks. Instead, the Germans built a bizarre mechanical marvel that was eventually destroyed by its very own creators in April 1945, simply to prevent its imminent capture by advancing Allied forces, permanently ending the bloody era of ultra-heavy static artillery forever, and leaving behind nothing but a tragic legacy of absolute strategic hubris and utter financial ruin. The G-series nerve agents. Late December 1936, deep inside a laboratory belonging to the German chemical conglomerate IG Farben at Elberfeld, Dr. Gerhard Schrader is working to solve an agricultural problem. His objective is to develop a synthetic pesticide to reduce German reliance on imported crops. While experimenting with liquid phosphorus-based compounds, he synthesizes a substance exhibiting extreme toxicity to insects. During routine handling, a minute highly diluted droplet of this organophosphate falls onto a glass bench. Instantly, Schrader and his assistant are exposed to the invisible vapor. They experience immediate, terrifying symptoms. Their pupils constrict to pinpoints, a condition known as meiosis. Their lungs tighten, making breathing nearly impossible, and they rapidly lose basic muscle control. Realizing this compound is far too hazardous for commercial agricultural use, Schrader names the substance Taboon, deriving the title directly from the German word for taboo. This accidental spill birthed the first of the G-series nerve agents. Following the militarization of Schrader's discoveries, the German army constructed a highly secret chemical production plant in 1939 at Dyhernfurth, operating under the codename Hochwerk. The sheer danger of this substance meant full-scale production could not begin until 1942. The industrial synthesis of Taboon required specialized, desperate engineering solutions. The intermediate chemical reactions produced corrosive byproducts that would eat through standard industrial equipment. To contain the nightmare, engineers were forced to use massive reaction vessels lined entirely with quartz or pure silver. To protect the workforce from instantaneous death, the final chemical processes had to be conducted behind thick, double-walled glass enclosures while the factory air was continually monitored. Despite these logistical hurdles, by the end of the war, the Dyhernfurth plant successfully manufactured 12,153 metric tons of Taboon, filling thousands of artillery shells and aerial bombs with a liquid designed to short-circuit the human nervous system. As the military defeat of the Third Reich became inevitable in early 1945, this vast chemical stockpile almost changed the course of history from within. Armaments Minister Albert Speer formulated a desperate, classified plan to assassinate Adolf Hitler and overthrow the government. Speer intended to stop the Nero Decree, Hitler's apocalyptic order to completely destroy all remaining German industrial infrastructure. Speer planned to introduce Taboon into the ventilation shaft of the subterranean Führerbunker in Berlin, believing the toxic agent would quickly spread and eliminate Hitler and his inner circle. The plot was foiled by simple fluid dynamics and paranoia. Speer lacked access to the volatile variant Seren. Taboon itself was viscous and did not disperse easily as a gas without mechanical vaporization. Furthermore, before Speer could attempt the strike, Hitler ordered the construction of a tall ventilation chimney around the air intake specifically to thwart gas attacks, putting the shaft entirely out of reach. Despite stockpiling over 12,000 tons of tabun and developing even deadlier agents like sarin and soman, the German military never deployed these weapons on the battlefield. This immense restraint was driven entirely by strategic deterrence and flawed intelligence. Because IG Farben kept the organophosphate synthesis a total secret, German military planners wrongly assumed the Allies had independently discovered the exact same nerve agents. They believed any chemical strike would provoke a devastating Allied retaliation against German cities lacking proper chemical defenses. Additionally, personal trauma played a role. On October 14, 1918, Hitler was temporarily blinded during a British mustard gas attack near Ypres. That excruciating World War I experience heavily contributed to his distinct reluctance to initiate offensive chemical warfare. On May 6, 1953, a 20-year-old Royal Air Force mechanic named Ronald Madison participated in a trial where 200 milligrams of liquid sarin were applied directly to his arm over layers of uniform cloth. Within 20 minutes, Madison collapsed, suffered severe convulsions, and died.